You could either talk about revision, you could either write a lecture on revision that's like 18 hours long, or you could write one that's like 5 minutes long, or, I mean, there's so much to include, and there's no way to give you a perfect lecture on revision. So just keep in mind that there's a lot more that can be done. You also could approach it in a much less dramatic way. Like you could just, handle it almost like looking at it sentence by sentence. But I want to start by just saying, to remind us, you really cannot edit a novel in one pass. So if you're thinking that you're just going to start and edit it and get to the end and you're frustrated because you feel like, why isn't it better or done? I would like you to sort of like loosen up that mindset and think instead about how I phrase it is to edit in waves or passes. I like that. I like the idea of waves because it makes me think of the beach and the ocean. So each wave that you enter is you're going to pick a particular element to revise for. So I'm only revising to change my book from third person to first person, like Andrea is doing. You're only revising to, go through these particular things I'm going to walk you through in a second. So each pass, each wave is its own thing, and it can help you to be specific. That doesn't mean you're not going to notice other things and change them anyways, but the goal is also to sort of stave off the kind of perfectionism that has you working sentence by sentence to the point where you can't even look at the plot. Like, let go of the sentence stuff up front, save that for later. Let go of all of the nitpicking, small, fine detail stuff. I really think there's a lot of value in this. You hear it a lot, read your work aloud. But what I would recommend is that you try and actually set aside time, like over a weekend maybe, and I know this is challenging and maybe we can't all do it at once, but where you could actually spend the weekend reading it aloud to yourself so that you read it from start to finish. Might not work, might not have enough time, you might be a slow reader. So however you go about it, there's just a lot of benefit. You hear things so differently when you read it aloud. You catch things, you notice things, it's just a really powerful process. I've even had people who say they read it aloud and record it and then play it back to themselves, which I think is like next level stuff. I don't know if I have the patience for that, but I do have the patience to read it aloud. It's kind of like if you've ever had to prepare reading. Well, we did that with our open mic, right? When you prepare a reading and you start to like practice what you're going to read out loud, and then you got the pen out, right? And you're like, oh, no, that doesn't work. So I think that's a really profound and simple step. The first place that I start when I have a completed draft is I start with a scene inventory. And we've talked a little bit about this. And you can do this in a variety of ways. You can do it like I do. I'm super old school, super non-high tech, and I use an Excel spreadsheet where I just make a grid. You could handwrite it in a notebook. You could use Scrivener if that works for you. You could use 3x5 cards, which are great because then you can move them around and like put them out where you can see them. So a lot of people like that format. So however you do it, you're going to inventory each scene, not just each chapter, because some chapters have multiple scenes in them, each scene. And what you want, these are the details that I like to put in there. Other people might add other details as well. But the most important ones is, particularly if you have co-protagonists, so which character or characters are present. It's sort of which point of view character, I should say, is present. You can also add what other characters are there. What is the main action? And by that, I don't mean like she drove a car to the store. I mean, she drove a car to the store and robbed it. I don't know. Your protagonist probably wouldn't do that. The thing that happens that is like, you can say in this chapter, my protagonist does X toward the larger goal of the story. So what is that main action that has to do with their goal? So what happens in this chapter? I think it's useful to see what the setting and the time of day is. So where that happens and what time, because sometimes you'll find inconsistencies like, oh, all that happened in, an hour, that's not possible. Or, these two things can't happen on the same day. That happens for me a lot chronologically. And then you want to leave yourself with the consequence of the scene. So what happened in terms of the main action? And then where did it leave off? Like, did it set up, what was the result? What was the consequence? How does it set your protagonist up for the next scene? What did they learn? What came out of that scene? And sometimes what that'll do for you is help you realize that a scene might not actually be working because it's missing some of this crucial information. It doesn't really have a main action. It doesn't actually set your character up for any kind of consequence. And you can go, okay, this scene either needs to go or it needs to be modified in some way. And your scene inventory, if you have a large novel, you know, could be long. When I do it in Microsoft Excel, it's, you know, it's many pages. But what's great is then I have this like master document that I can look through. Or if you do 3x5 cards, which I also like, you can lay them out. You know, we can put different colors for different characters. It's just such a great way to really take a snapshot. Because what happens to me is I get overwhelmed trying to remember what happens where in my novel. It's like, I know I need to revise the plot, but then I don't remember where that particular thing is and how do I move it around. So getting that scene inventory will help you have the tools to do that. And then, of course, you also need to be able to take a snapshot of the plot on a sort of more macro scale, because the scenes, you can get a little lost in the weeds of the scenes. So coming back to that lecture I did, I think last session on the energetic markers, and hopefully you still have the slides, but if you need them again, let me know. Making sure that you can just go ahead and chart those 4 energetic markers for all point of view characters. So like Sochi, you have multiple point of view characters, or at least more than one. You need to be able to chart it for all of them, not just Alix or something, right? If you only have one protagonist, you're lucky. You want to just be able to, again, have a snapshot. And I also enjoy using the visual that Martha Alderson's book. Remember I showed you that chart, that kind of grid, not really a grid. It's like, it just kind of looks like a couple of peaks, right? And I like that visual, just kind of writing what they are in so that I can see it in one place. And I actually used to get butcher paper and do it fairly large where I could put it up on my wall, but however works for you. So scene inventory, and then make sure you've got your energetic markers clear, because those 2 tools, when you go into the revision, are going to be really helpful for looking at, like, you're going to get right up front, you're going to get a sense of some things that need to be changed or fixed or tweaked right away. And again, if you have multiple protagonists, yeah, you want to do that for each one. And then, you know, you might do this in a different order. So maybe you do your scene inventory, and then you might do this scene assessment, or you might do scene inventory, plot inventory, and then assess scenes. Doesn't matter to me. So once you've done that, then you want to go through each of your scenes and you want to assess these elements. So again, these are not all the things you need to look for, but these are like really strong basics. If you have these, you're on your way to a really solid scene. So it's very important that it has a strong, clear character goal. So we know what your character is after in the scene, what they're out to do. And of course that ties into the plot, right? It makes us a little bit smarter. And that character goal, of course, it's going to be thwarted, opposed, or complicated, because a character goal that is simply set out and then met, you have no tension. So if you've got a scene where you're like, wow, they achieved that goal really easily, maybe I need to rethink that. You want to ask yourself, do I have more action than exposition? So is it moving? Does it have the energy of a scene, that beat by beat momentum? Or am I getting bogged down in, you know, character thoughts? Am I explaining some backstory? What's happening here? You want to keep that balance really nice and balanced, because when you have too much exposition, the pace slows. And sometimes it is possible to have too much action, but I find that's rarely a complaint of a reader. But sometimes if the level of the action is really high and intense, and you have so much of it and it doesn't relent, sometimes the reader can get a little exhausted. Does the scene further the plot? Do we learn something new that we did not know before? And that can either be plot relevant information, or it can be character relevant. So sometimes we learn more about the character. Sometimes there's more of a larger piece of the puzzle is filled in. If you are someone who writes a lot of dialogue, you want to make sure that we don't have floating heads syndrome, which means that we see the setting around the character. We have interaction with their physical body and also their internal experience, their emotions. So we know how they feel. We see where they are. We're not just dialogue, blah, 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 for pages and pages. And then your scenes should end in a tense or beckoning way that encourages us to read more. I want to give Andrea really good props for that. Every chapter of yours that I read ended in a way where I would, if that was a book I was reading, I would keep reading, and I would not be able to put the book down. So that takes skill to learn as well. And you don't want to leave the reader too satisfied at the end of a scene. When it comes to character, again, you know, we can do thousands of character exercises and character sketches, but really I think there's a few important things. Number one, point of view. Is it clear? Meaning, you know, is it evident to the reader, this is the point of view you're writing in, you don't make any slips into other points of view, and you've chosen the right degree of intimacy, meaning you've chosen let's say an intimate point of view, like first person or third person deep, deep point of view or intimate point of view. Or maybe your story is one that really benefits from an omniscient point of view, which allows some distance. And that's gonna come up through based on feedback, what people tell you more than anything. I mean, you might have an intuitive hit as well, but is your characters, or I should say, are your characters' voices strong and clear and distinguishable from other characters? And this is something I struggle with, where sometimes my characters all sound the same. And so really trying to identify what is unique about them and giving them that voice. So when you're going through, I might even do a pass for individual characters, as I do this, not just try to assess them all at once. Again, particularly if you have multiple point of view characters. Do they have character integrity? So do they behave in ways that the reader finds believable, true, authentic, but they're also, as I say in the next point, undergoing a journey of change or transformation. So we want the character to feel real, believable. We want to understand their motivation, and we want to see that they've changed somewhat by the end of the story, in a way that the story provides opportunity for, right? It's the story that's like the plot is working on your character as much as the other way around. And then lastly, is your character dialogue snappy? I don't know if it has to be snappy, but intentional. All dialogue really, we've talked about, it has to be, conversation's greatest hits. It has to feel purposeful. It has to feel stylized and shaped and crafted, not full of pleasantries and fillers and info dumps, right? It has to feel like there's a reason for the dialogue. And also, alternatively, if you struggle with too much exposition, you might find that you're telling when it could easily be dropped into dialogue. So I find a lot of narrative would benefit from just being made into dialogue between characters. And I will send you these slides, of course, because I know I'm throwing a lot. Additionally, now we're getting towards like the detail stuff, right? So you've done the big picture stuff and you've really assessed the plot, the characters, the scenes. Now we can start to play and have fun with things like imagery. Are you using imagery in these ways? Have you used it in place of things like saying he felt or she felt or they felt, and using sensory imagery to convey feeling and emotion? Are you using images to convey thematic points you want to get across in a subtle way? Have you used it to foreshadow something that's coming? Using the weather, the environment, an image that the character thinks or remembers that kind of, sets a feeling, to create a mood or ambiance. And just generally to strengthen a scene where sometimes if it feels flat or missing something or lacking something, imagery can be really powerful in waking it up. This is not a must-have. Not every writer, although I would say the group we have here, most of you write with imagery, so I'll leave it in. But some people are not very imagistic in their writing, but you all largely are. And then lastly, at the very final wave or several final waves, you're going to start looking at your sentences. And it's not to say, again, that you might not catch sentence stuff along the way, particularly if you read it out loud. And you're going to notice stuff as you go through, and you can certainly attend to it, but don't get overly hung up on it. But this is for later on. And these, again, remember I did that whole lecture on sentences. So revisit some of that stuff, but, just kind of look for the basics, like sentence length. Do I have too many short sentences, too many long ones, which you will notice when you read it out loud. Do I have unnecessary words that can go, there was, it was, the fact of the matter, whatever, the truth of it was. Are there things that just kind of like, you're not cutting to the chase? Are there redundancies and repetitions? Words you find keep popping up. Do you start too many sentences with I in a row? Things like that. Do your characters use a lot of perceptual words? So he saw, he heard, she noticed, she observed, that you can cut out and get right to the things that they see, hear, notice, and observe. And are you finding cliches and things that feel trite or overused, or that they don't really say something in a fresh way? Excuse me. So that's really the gist of my process. You might fill in 3 other waves that I don't use. You might take out some because you combine them as you go through. I mean, I can't say, but I think if you break it down into a little checklist of these items, and I know it sounds like a lot of work, but I think that for me, I actually start to feel excited when I go through to revise for a specific thing, because then I know what I'm looking for. It feels manageable to me. And like I said, some of you might kind of organically combine these when you're going through the way that your mind works. You might be a little better at looking for multiple things at once. I'm not as good at that. So